Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all our participants who are joining us today. It's a pleasure to welcome you all to this virtual dialogue webinar on the Beijing+25 and training for gender equality. My name is Ria Ligari. I'm the Training Center's Community of Practice Consultant. And we're very lucky to be joined today by a very large audience and 4 expert panelists, one of whom we're still waiting for, but I'm hoping she will be able to arrive before her presentation. And first, so the outline of today's webinar you can see on your screens. And first, we're just going to go through logistics so that and how this webinar works so that all of you can participate fully. Then I'll introduce today's topic and panelists who each will speak in turn. And finally, we will have time to answer your questions for our speakers. So please remember that you can send in your questions for our speakers at any time using the questions tab on the right-hand side of the GoToWebinar toolbar. And at the end of the session, I'll pose your questions to our panelists after their presentations. And I should also note that this webinar is being recorded and it will be posted on the UN Women Training Center's YouTube channel. So I'd like to introduce very briefly our panelists for today. We're very, very lucky and happy to be joined by Jessamine Encarnacion of the UN Women's Global Gender Data Program, Hamleta Verma of the International Center for Research on Women, Rania Ayman of Entrepreneur and the Beijing+25 Youth Task Force, and Itza Castañeda of the International Union for the Conservation of Nature. I'll introduce each panelist in turn in more detail before their presentations, but thank you all for joining us today, and we're very excited to hear what you have to say. And so before we begin, let me just explain what virtual dialogues are. So at the UN Women Training Center, we believe in creating knowledge and sharing learning in a participatory manner. And that is really the drive behind our virtual dialogues. So these dialogues are mechanisms for us as training practitioners to continually discuss, exchange, and share knowledge, and to nurture a community for collective learning across the world. So these virtual dialogues are part webinar and part forum discussion. And at the end of this session, I'll explain how you can access the forum if you're interested in participating in the debates. So this is the second virtual dialogue that's been hosted by the UN Women Training Center's Community of Practice in 2019. And I should note that the COP, which I hope you'll all be able to join, is an open platform for dialogue and knowledge sharing for participants from all over the world. And our members include government, civil society, academia, members of UN agencies and international organizations. And you're all very welcome to join, anyone who's interested in training for gender equality. So that brings me to our topic for today, which is Beijing+25 and training for gender equality. So as we know, next year, 2020, marks the 25th anniversary of the Platform for Action, which is considered the most progressive blueprint ever for advancing women's rights. And when it was adopted in 1995 by 189 governments, they committed to strategic, bold action in 12 critical areas of concern, which include poverty, education and training, health, violence, armed conflict, the economy, power and decision-making, institutional mechanisms, human rights, the media, the environment, and the girl child. Now, training, even though it features in the title of education and training, is actually present across the board, across all of these 12 areas of concern. And although we've made progress to date on gender equality and women's rights, as we all know, progress has been very slow, and we have much left to do. So that's why we're here today, to discuss why is training for gender equality well placed to support progress on the Beijing Platform for Action? How can we use training to support efforts to achieve the promise of Beijing? And what practical examples do we have of using training for gender equality to advance change in some of these critical areas for action of the platform? So we're going to reflect on these broad questions, and we're now going to turn to our panelists' presentations. And please remember, all of you, that you can send in your questions at any time using the questions tab. So first up, we have Jessamine Encarnacion, our first speaker, who we're delighted to have with us today. Jessamine is the statistics specialist for UN Women's Global Gender Data Program, making every woman and girl count. She has also worked on the data analysis for the 8th edition of UN Women's flagship publication, Progress of the World's Women. And before joining UN Women, she worked for more than 15 years with the Philippines National Statistical Coordination Board. She rose to be director of the Social Statistics Office in 2013 And she was also Assistant National Statistician of the Philippine Statistics Authority during its formative period in 2014 through to 2015. So Jessamine, I'm very, very happy to give you the floor. What I'm going to do now is hand over the control of the mouse and the keyboard to you, so you can go through the slides. Let's see if this works. Jessamine, can you try for me to go through the slides? Perfect. Okay, great. So that seems to be working. I think you're still on mute, so I'm going to just ask you to unmute, maybe? Yes, perfect. Great. So please, Jessamine, if you could begin your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. So thank you, Ruya, and good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone. So today I have been asked to discuss three things: how training on gender-sensitive data and analysis can contribute to achieving the PFA, what progress have we made to date in this kind of training, and what we need to do in the future. So on the first question, it would be good to remind ourselves on what we have aimed to achieve as far as the PFA and gender statistics are concerned. We promise to generate and disseminate gender disaggregated data and information for planning and evaluation. And we have identified actions to be taken by key actors. So specifically, by national, regional, and international statistical services and relevant governmental and UN agencies. They should lead the collection, compilation, and analysis of gender statistics, but on a regular basis. Involvement, of course, of women's studies and research organizations, and establishment of focal points, among others. And in terms of what the UN should be doing, it's to promote methodology development, assist countries in the development of gender policies and programs, among others. And as to national, wait, and as to, yeah, and as to multilateral development institutions and bilateral donors, they need to encourage and support the development of national capacity by providing resources and technical assistance so that countries can fully measure the work done by women and men. And turning these promises into action in the PFA requires capacity development. And promises that are not monitored due to lack of data are, of course, likely to receive less priority. So I guess we thus must push for investments in national statistical capacities and mainstream gender in their strategies. So as to the question, what progress have we made to date in terms of gender statistics towards achieving the PFA? In 2006, the UN Statistical Commission endorsed a global gender statistics program. So basically, its primary objective is to build capacities of countries to collect, disseminate, and use quality gender statistics. And among its activities, we have the biannual Global Forum on Gender Statistics. And that forum actually provides a venue for statisticians, producers, users of statistics, policymakers to promote and advance gender statistics through the exchange of knowledge and experiences. So I believe the next Global Forum on Gender Statistics will be held next year on the margins of the World Data Forum. So another sub-program under the Global Gender Statistics Program is the activities of the Interagency Expert Group on Gender Statistics. So this was formed in 2007, and it was aimed to promote collaboration amongst key stakeholders and to provide guidance to the global program on its directions. So the UNSD serves as the coordinator of this global program on gender statistics, and as coordinator, they They provide avenues where they can promote greater use of common standards and tools. You can see on your screen here the online platform, which provides a compilation of the various e-learning tools developed by various actors in the UN system, some UN agencies, from the UN regional commissions, and of course from UNSD. And you can see also on the screen how you can access these resources. So basically, these toolkits are designed to support NSOs, or National Statistical Offices, in their efforts to increase understanding and use of gender statistics by government officials as well as other users. And these toolkits consist of thematic modules, which include short, user-friendly definitions, practical examples, and hands-on exercises. Of course, coming from UN Women, I would be amiss if I won't mention the efforts of UN Women with regards to capacity development, and particularly training on gender statistics. So aside from the great and constant efforts from my colleagues from UN Women Training Center on capacity development, UN Women also developed a global gender data program. We call it Women Count, short for making every woman and girl count. It is a radical shift on how we do gender statistics. We promote institutionalized and system-wide change where capacity development is fully integrated. So for example, on enabling policy environment, we develop tools to assist countries when they want to do national strategies for the development of their gender statistics. It is important for them to assess their capacity as well as data gaps. So we provide trainings within countries and sometimes within regions where various countries can actually participate. So I'm happy to share with you that just last month, we actually organized a regional training workshop on this area of work in Africa, and 6 countries have participated. Cabo Verde, Central African Republic, Cote d'Ivoire, Democratic Republic of Congo, Malawi, and Mozambique. And of course, we ensure that the training doesn't stop in the 3-day training workshop, and ensure that this translate into concrete actions. So we have the 6 countries by next year developing their own countries strategy for the development of gender statistics within their national statistical system. Secondly, in terms of production of gender statistics, under the Women Count program, we provide trainings on generating new and more disaggregated gender statistics in line with the principle of leaving no one behind, and ensure that while we do capacitate national statistical systems, these are institutionalized within the system and thus goes beyond the lifetime of the Women Count program or project. And lastly, parallel to our efforts to close data gaps, we work with users to address gaps in the use of available gender statistics. So in as much as we invest on trainings on data producers, we ensure that trainings of data users are equally recognized, addressed, and implemented. So the Women Count program, it's implemented across different levels at the global, regional, and national levels. So I will just take the Asia Pacific regional project as a case in point, as a particular example. So to coordinate training efforts on gender statistics within the region, we established a subgroup on gender statistics training as part of the broader group on the network for the coordination of statistical training in Asia and the Pacific. As part of its work program, it is now developing a training curriculum for gender statistics, the first of its kind in Asia Pacific. And on this slide, just to give you a glimpse of what we're doing, you will have there the structure of the training curriculum. I think in the development of this training curriculum, it was important for us to note that for many years, training on statistics focused on the production side of gender statistics, and much more needs to be done to encourage data use for policy making. So as you can see, the training curriculum thus provides equal focus on integrating gender perspective in official statistics, utilizing gender data for policy making, user-producer dialogues on gender data needs and priorities, among others. So you can see here, I mean, specifically in that diagram, there are specific modules for data users, specific modules for data producers, as well as specific modules that will cut across both data users and data producers' needs. And further, taking off from the training curriculum, we are building a public repository on gender statistics training materials. This would cover 13 modules out of the training curriculum. And as shown on the slide here, we're taking the module on communicating gender data as an example. It would contain various training materials, such as the syllabus, presentation, exercises, sample data sets that can be explored, list of resources for further studies, etc. And we are also building a public repository on gender statistics training experts. This is basically in recognition of the fact that while it is arguably relatively easier to find experts on gender statistics, training experts would be a bit more challenging as specialized skills are required to be effective resources for capacity development. So again, I'm also very happy to share that while both repositories, the training materials as well as the training experts repositories, were developed mainly in Asia and the Pacific under the Women Count regional project in that region. These resources are expected to be accessed and used by various countries across different regions, say of Africa, Latin America, Middle East, and North Africa. And at least these are for the countries that where UN Women's Women Count program is being implemented. And version 1.0 of these resources, these repositories, will be available before this month ends. So basically before the year ends. So lastly, what do we need to do in the future? Results of the needs assessment that we have conducted points us to where training is needed as far as gender statistics is concerned. So there's a need to integrate a gender's perspective, not only in official statistics, but basically how the national statistical system operates. So it's not only the NSOs, but also the ministries, departments, and agencies, CSOs, research institutions, etc., within the national statistical system. We want to ensure that gender perspective is integrated in all its statistical operations. And we also the need for creating gender data stories to better communicate to users, among others. And in terms of key areas of interest, but I must say also very challenging, calculating and interpreting statistics on various thematic topics such as on gender and environment, gender and migration, interpreting gender data as well as intersectionality or multi-level disaggregation, among others, in the principle of LNOB. But to effectively capacitate national statistical systems on gender statistics, and thus must meet the promises we made in the PFA, availability and accessibility of training resources are simply not enough. Political commitment is imperative. And lastly, UN Women, together with Paris 21, developed a framework and guidelines which adopt a comprehensive, granular, and holistic approach to enhancing the capacity of the national statistical systems to produce and communicate gender statistics. So Bottom line, when we implement the Women Count program, we do not only support a survey or produce data for specific indicators. More critically, we provide the whole package. We support countries in building gender-sensitive statistical systems and making sure that capacities are developed at the individual, institutional, and system-wide levels. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jasmine, for your wonderful presentation. That was absolutely brilliant. I've gotten some comments from some of our listeners saying that some of them are having problems with the audio. So we're trying to fix this, but I'm not sure why this is the case. I think I heard Jasmine fine. I hope the other speakers did as well. And I hope as many listeners as possible did as well, but we'll look into it and try to fix it. And now I'd just like to give the floor over to Hemlata Verma, who is our specialist on gender-based violence here with us today. So I'm going to just introduce her very briefly. Hemlata is a technical specialist on gender, violence, and sexual and reproductive health and rights at the International Center for Research on Women, where she handles operations research, program evaluation, and grounding in gender analysis and capacity building. She is an expert on the prevention of gender-based violence, violence against women and girls, and promoting sexual and reproductive health and rights. She specifically leads the Promoting Adolescents, Engagement, Knowledge, and Health program in Rajasthan, and she also works on a range of other initiatives, which I know she will speak about today, including the Gender Equity Movement in Schools program, which is a school-based model to prevent gender-based violence by engaging adolescent girls and boys in critical thinking and self-reflection. So Hemlata, thank you so much for joining us today. And I'm just going to give you control over the keyboard and mouse so you can go through the slides, and I'll hand over to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ruya. I'm just trying to see if the control is working.
I think it's going through the slides. I see your first slide now, and I can see your mouse. Does it seem okay for you?
Yes. Great. So hello, everyone. And I'm really glad to be here and talking about our overall commitment to the PFA and assessing that where we have reached over the past 20 years. I would begin my presentation by telling you all that most of my experiences and learnings around the trainings on gender equality that I'll be sharing today are based on a program named Gender Equity Movement in Schools, which is a program for primary prevention of gender-based violence. And so the question which we always pose for ourselves when we start working with children or with school teachers who are the main leaders or the agents of change, or also those who themselves undergo change when we talk about engaging on gender equality. So the first question we pose, and what everyone poses for themselves when they come for these trainings, is, what do I gain from gender equality? And so when we talk about, sorry, I think the transition of slides is taking a bit of time. Okay, so when we start working with school students, boys and girls together, through the school-based program, which largely aims to foster gender equality, redefine masculinities, and negate all forms of violence. The first question is, that who will lead this change. And certainly for the change to be sustainable, the idea is always to institutionalize the larger processes of starting off on the pathways of change. And when we talk about institutionalizing in the education system, so no other than the teachers can play this role best. And in the initial phase of when teachers start working or discussing the issues of gender equality, when they start getting exposed to it first, and when they start transacting it with the children in the school through a structured curriculum, they need a lot of hand-holding support, for which the program staff is also trained on the issues of gender equality. And the trainings for the teachers as well as the program staff are same. However, each one's trajectory of moving towards gender equality or questioning the path, the inequitable gender norms are different. So I'll focus mostly here on how the teachers progress during the gender trainings. So the strategy and the content, when we talk about what happens in these gender trainings, how do we plan them? So the idea is always to have the sessions for males and females together. Whenever we do the gender trainings, the teachers, both male and female, need to be brought together to create a space where together they challenge the inequitable norms, they challenge the status quo, start critical reflection of the issue within their own lives, and also find a voice for themselves, also a collective space where they all can put their views and also have a discussion, debate, and then move towards some collective ways of making small steps of change in their own lives, in their own environment. So having a collective space for males and females together is one way that we always move ahead in the gender trainings. And similarly, the sessions on gender equality, or the sessions for largely the curriculum for primary prevention of gender-based violence, is made in a way that the sessions are transacted together for girls and boys in the classrooms, and they can be done either by male teachers or by female teachers. And so while we may say that being together in a gender training is very important, however, there are always barriers within the government education system, as well as the overall social barriers, the cultural barriers, which prevent the teachers to come together during the training on sessions on sexuality. So as on the screen, there is a picture here of a recent training that we did with the teachers, where we saw a group of male and female teachers coming together without any hesitation to talk about the issue of sexuality, understanding your body. However, the strategy for that is that if you talk to them processes or the issue of sexuality as an adult, they get really conservative and they go into their own shells. So the idea is to actually take the overall discussion first in the context of adolescent health, so that the environment is not very threatening for them. And slowly, when we build the conversations, they all start reflecting about this issue in their own lives. But that may not be true for all the situations. At some places, if teachers hesitate a lot, then we may not be able to even bring them together on the issue of sexuality.
Hamlet, is everything okay?
Yeah, I'm not able to navigate slides.
Well, if you want, I can go through them. Should I go to the next one? Is this the correct one?
The next one hasn't come so far.
Okay, it's the one I'm seeing is called Gender Training Strategy and Content.
Yeah, it's.
Mhm. Can you see it okay, or is it not showing up?
I'm not able to see the second slide. It's still the first one.
Okay, let me try again. Just 1 second. We've got one slide on learning, and then the next one is putting human rights first. Oh, I think now it's working from your side.
Priya, do you want it to slide? Maybe that helps.
Sure, I could if you want. I'll go through the slides. 1 second. I'm just going to display my screen. So if you let me know, what is the title of the slide that you'd like to present right now?
Gender training strategy and the second slide.
Okay. So this is training strategy and then learning. And then putting human rights first. Is the slide you're seeing now all right? Or should I go to the next one?
I think this is fine.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. And
next slide, and I'll go through.
Sure. Thank you. Sorry for the interruption.
No.
So when we start talking about the issue of gender equality, we have always experienced that if we begin the discussions with unpacking the overall issue of the social construct of gender, often at the very onset we get an impression in the trainings that the participants start feeling that it's an idea about pitching men against women, whereas it's the idea is to have a joint voice, a joint initiative to question the larger patriarchal mindset. But if the tone of the trainings right from the beginning is set up in a way that it is men versus women, so it becomes very difficult to move forward. Therefore, the way that we have found what is the best pathway for moving forward and change is to start the discussion with human rights, and which helps to give space for everyone, both men and women and boys and girls, to connect the issue of violation of rights within their own lives. Because the idea is to help each one of them realize that at any point of time, each one of us has experienced gender-based discrimination, gender-based violence, or basic violation of rights. Therefore, it's easier to move forward in the discussion when we bring the human rights first and then start the discussion on gender. Ria, can you help me navigate to the next one? And then after talking about human rights, it's again talking about the issue of self and not immediately jumping onto the issue of gender. So when the participants, so here as we are talking about teachers, when we start talking about the issue of gender-based discrimination, again, the voices about the issue that male teachers or boys or males or boys are largely perpetrators, and they are the ones who are the cause of the problem. Those voices become louder right at the beginning of the trainings, whereas that puts them all on defensive, and there is a high risk of losing out on the larger vision of helping everyone to reflect on the root causes of gender inequality. And thus starting off with a space where everyone can build conversations around how they have experienced power, negative use of power in their own lives, and a space where they can share personal experiences of when they felt discriminated or when they could not achieve what they wanted. So again, starting with self-reflections and then moving on to the issue of challenging the gender norms. We can go on to the next one. So when we start framing messages on gains of gender equality, the basic question is, what do I get out of being gender equitable? Every time there is a voice in the room when we are doing the gender trainings, at some point someone will very slowly say, so why should men change? And then slowly the voices will also start coming up. Okay, why women should change? So however, why they should change, the pathways for that, we've realized through the gender trainings, are very different for men as well as women. So when we talk about working with male teachers or with male participants in these trainings, it is the larger idea of giving the positive spin to the discussions or to the arguments about changing the gender norms for better aspirations, for a better relationship, good communication, and sharing a happy and a friendly environment with children or with the family. That finds more resonance among the male participants. Whereas for the female participants, the overall idea of that violence against women or gender-based violence itself is wrong, and we need to speak out against it. A very simple argument and discussion itself can help set the tone. So largely when we work together with men and women, so the idea is to create an emotional connect and to motivate all of them to reduce the harm of what they have gone through for the next generation. So we can go on to the next one. Also, calling out what is violence as violence is very important. So it is through use of case studies, which we try to have a discussion through the groups and use it in an interesting way by asking people to take a stand, whether there is violence in the situation or there is no violence, and giving space to each one of the participants to express, even if what clearly seems that as violence, there may still be people in the room who may justify that it is not violence. So I think those five voices are the most important to be heard and given space so that they can come out with the things that helps them believe that why something is not violence. And only once they've spoken out, then can we start building the overall narrative for understanding that why something that they are seeing as superficially as not not being gender-based violence, why it is violence. And then also helping people to connect the narratives of when they give their arguments to their own lives, again gives a lot of space for people to reflect. And here is where the gender trainers and the people who are leading the training need to acknowledge and also give space to the participants to tell them that what they are saying is their experience. They must have experienced some of the things in their own lives, but now that we are together here questioning certain things, can we start looking at something which is not so apparent and why these things are happening. So yeah, next slide please. especially when we talk about the issue of masculinity, one learning that we have had is that in trainings or even in classroom sessions, men or boys, they need separate spaces to start reflecting on the issue of basically the kind of pressures that they have, to understand the concept of masculinity, what pressures it puts on them, what are the vulnerabilities, powers, and privileges, and in the context of relationships around them. And why is there a requirement of a safe space or a separate space for them to start asking these questions? Is again that it's the larger concept of the masculinities that is predominant largely in the community, that men do not need to express their vulnerabilities, and they fear being judged in front of women or in front of girls. So therefore, it's easier for them to come out with their vulnerabilities and start questioning their own stance when men are together. So it's important for them to first see the inequalities that are set because of these inequitable norms between the men, and then move on the discussion to the inequalities between men and women. Next slide. So the gender trainings, one, of course, need to be very focused on the issue of gender and violence. However, they also need to continue to link these issues. So if we are talking about the issue of gender equality and violence-free learning spaces, we need to connect it to the issue of improved quality of education, or the value of the girl child, or prevention of child marriage, which in the GEMS program, we tried to connect it to the larger strategies that we are talking about, even in the PFA. So which the countries were politically committed on, or the local state governments were committed on. So linking the overall issue of gender into the larger institutional policies really helped to further the narrative and the dialogue on gender-based violence prevention at the government level as well. And also it needs to be more relevant in the context of conflict-ridden areas, such as one in Jharkhand, where we had students coming from areas where there was armed conflict, and in those areas for children to have discussion on gender-based violence, and in a context where they are also looking at armed conflict, was a very challenging thing for teachers as well as for us. But the overall concept of violation of human rights, and understanding what are human rights, and understanding that we all need spaces to reflect and express ourselves, help children in untangling and unpacking the issue of gender-based violence and in and around them. The next one. So we always feel that, okay, so when people go through the gender trainings, when they start questioning the issue of gender inequality or gender roles, the stereotypes, so how do they start talking? What are the initial discussions or narratives that come out? So here are a few examples that I have presented here, and I think I would want to focus one which is most recent, coming out from one of the western states of India, from Rajasthan, where a male teacher during the gender training had started to reflect on understanding, like it was almost the second day of the training when he started to reflect that he understands how the negative use of power by men puts women and girls at more risk, and how he understood, and the reflections of that went home. And after the training, he said that he went home and he spoke to his mother that the parda, the ghungat that she does, is also a manifestation of gender equality. And he said that and why she has to do it is because the men in the household are restricting her mobility. And having a candid conversation on an issue which is so political in that context, cultural context, was one of the initiatives which helps us see that when young men or when teachers, males, start talking about the issue of gender equality in their personal lives and not just as teachers to children, so how are the conversations coming out? The next one. And here are a few questions that when children start, boys and girls both start getting exposed to the discussions on gender equality and the larger idea of challenging the status quo on social norms. So what do boys start talking about? What do girls start talking about? There are larger questions about why does child marriage happen? They start questioning that why do boys rape girls? And why do boys and girls experience different body changes? And is physical punishment not violence? So these are the kind of discussions that start happening between boys and girls as well as between teachers and students. So next. And thank you. That's our GEMS team.
Thank you so much, Hemlata, to you and explaining the GEMS team work to us, which is completely fascinating. And I'm very, very glad to note that we now have a third speaker as well with us. It's going to add to the excellent insights that Jessamine and Hemlata have been sharing. And our third speaker today is Rania Ayman. I'm just going to introduce her very briefly before I hand over to her. So Rania is the founder and managing director of Entrepreneur, which is a mission-driven enterprise that works to bridge the economic gender gap by educating, training, and linking women to resources in Egypt. Her work focuses on advancing socioeconomic gender rights, specifically the right to an adequate standard of living based on SDG 8, which is on economic growth and decent work. And she is also a member of UN Women's Beijing+25 Youth Task Force, which is a group of 30 young leaders who are driving change in their communities. And they're going to be guiding UN efforts to place young people at the center of the Beijing+25 process. So Rania, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Roya, for the introduction. Hi, everyone. My name is Rania, as my mate said. I'm now representing my organization, Entrepreneur, representing UN Women Agora, which is a group of youth who are working together under the UN country regional office. We're working on some of the Beijing. We had a couple of meetings on the Beijing agreement. So we had a paper where we shared what we see of it, especially when it comes to the economic development and the gender against the violence against women and girls. So I want to take you through some of our recommendations, me and my team, that we worked on either in Beirut, Jordan, and Cairo. They will start by how we refer the violence against women as any act of gender-based violence that results in or is likely to result in physical, sexual, or psychological harm or suffering to women, including threats such as acts or liberty, whether occurring in public or private life. We met in a time where violence against women and girls are accepted by many in the region despite their violence or fundamental human rights. Of course, as well as calling the government and calling all the representatives in the organizations to support the agreements that we're trying to work on to end violence against women and girls, to address the vulnerability situation of many women and girls, including refugees, migrants, and disabled. So we believe that those and many other of the recommendations we're saying mainly aim to end the violence against women, because this is the core that we have to work on before working on the economic development. Because, for example, in my country, Egypt, if we engage more women in the economic field, our economics will raise up to 25%. So if we mention this, this will make a leap when it comes to the economic development. So in order to do this, we have to first address the problem facing the other women. Engaging women, engaging men, of course, in the process is very important, especially when it comes to the efforts and potential respectful relationships and gender equality between men, women, boys. Implementing and positioning service system that covers both urban and rural communities to ensure a comprehensive, available, accessible, quality and timely delivered to women and girls, especially the ones who suffer from violence, communicating with all the available services and channels, and ensure that all women and girls are informed on the services provided before, during, and after acts of violence. So those were some of the recommendations, as I mentioned before, added from our team. I could share with you the document if you would like, and this is briefly what I want to share with you when it comes to the gender violence against women, especially when it comes that this is one of the main drivers to the economic development. If we focused on this, if we solve this, the economic condition of women in the Arab states and in the region will be way better. So this is it. Thank you so much.
Do you want me to show your screen, Rania?
It's fine. Already I shared what's in the document. I can share with you this document. If you want to share it with the team, this would be great.
That would be wonderful. If you send it to me, I'll make sure it's sent out to
you. Can share. Yes.
Okay, thank you so much. Oh, yes, I remember you sent it. Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much, Rania, for speaking with us today and for giving your excellent insights today as well. And we have a fourth and final speaker today. And we've been receiving your questions as well through the questions tab from our audience. So we hope that you'll keep sending those in, and then I'll post them after our next speaker's presentation. So our fourth and final speaker today is Itza Castañeda, and Itza is a Gender and Sustainable Development Special Advisor with the Global Gender Office of the International Union for the Conservation of Nature. She has over 2 decades of experience in initiatives involving public policy development, building local institutions, incorporating gender issues in development, and training on gender equality. Previously, Itza has served as the Director of Gender Equity at Mexico's Secretariat of the Environment and Natural Resources. She has also been the Senior Gender Advisor for UNDP Mexico, and since 2012, she advises environmental and gender policy for IUCN as the gender focal point for Mexico, and is particularly involved in the national REDD+ process. So Itza, thank you so much for joining us today. I'm just going to ask Itza maybe to unmute so that she can speak to us.
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes, perfect, Itza.
Yes.
Okay. I'm just going to control over the thing so you can share, go through the slides at your own pace. So I hand over to you. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Buenos días para todos, para todas. Well, I have been asked to talk about gender and environment issues in this virtual dialogue. So they asked me to answer two main questions. Why training for gender equality and environment matters? And my first thought was, well, we are living a global environmental crisis. So it is relevant. And this environmental crisis, it's presented in many, many different forms. For example, water scarcity, sorry, this is not well written, loss of biodiversity, climate change, climate-related disasters, energy, land degradation, among other many crises related to environmental issues. And the second point is that inequality and climate change have been identified as the 2 major challenges to achieve the SDGs. This has been identified in the latest report on SDGs that was presented this September. So the link between gender and environment is relevant. We have been working on these issues for more than 25 years. It is not new. Since Beijing, since Rio, since many other international commitments, different organizations like IUCN, where I used to work. I need to say that I'm not working anymore at IUCN, just as a consultant. WIDO, UN Women, many UN system organizations have been working on these linkages. So we have experience and we have leadership. We have developed tools and methodologies. It is not new. These methodologies and tools to address gender equality across the environmental sector. And the environmental sector is huge. It's not just natural resources, it's forest, biodiversity, land, sea, etc. We have also made strategic work at the international level, and we have worked from the global to the local outreach. We have also promoted gender equality beyond mere recognition of inequalities and vulnerabilities. We think that we need to develop gender responsive actions. That is what works. Gender equality as a driver of transformation and co-benefits. In the environmental field, it's important, the issue of the benefits and co-benefits related to environmental actions. And we have trained different sectors, from the international high-level delegations at the COPs, to the field, to the local organizations. So now, just as an example, we have, believe me, hundreds of tools. We have online courses, we have different guidelines. Just at IUCN, we have developed more than 7 resources. This is an example of an open online course on gender and environment. It's recent, it was launched last year. And you can see that we touch different, in different modules, different issues related to environment. Not only climate change, that it's more common now to see and to relate all the environmental crises to climate change. It is important to note that are other issues related to environmental crisis. So the second question is, how can we use training for gender equality to change to elicit the change needed to address the unfinished business of Beijing? What we are saying is what other colleagues that have said yet in this presentation, is that we need different approaches. Human rights is the basic, but we also need to have the intersectionality. And for environmental issues, it's very important to have the approach of territory. It means that we need to see wider, not only in a small scale, but in a bigger scale. And for that, we need to develop new methods and topics of training. The ones that we have developed once are useful, others are not useful anymore because of the current crisis. We need powerful forms of implementation to really have a change. And we need to involve new actors. Definitely, we have to work with other actors that we haven't worked before. It is necessary that training to be accompanied with. We need to generate knowledge, local knowledge. We need to capture and generate new knowledge, of course, as Yesamin had said. We need data and information. Every report from the UN system, from different organizations, are saying that we need gender and environment statistics and data. And we need to develop policies at the local country, at the national country. And of course, we need technical assistance to understand what does it mean gender in the environmental context. But we need also to monitor and to evaluate if we are having impact with our trainings. We cannot keep just going training and training hundreds, as we have trained, of people. We need to evaluate and monitor if we are having impact and helping to reduce the climate change and the climate and the environmental crisis. With the other sectors that we need to work with, definitely is the legislative sector and the private sector. We need to make changes in laws. That is one of the indicators of the SDGs, and Beijing has said that, and we have not worked enough changing some laws that keeps inequality in the environmental field. And for that, we need to bring the international frameworks to the national level and work, of course, with civil society. We cannot avoid working with different groups. Of course, we need to work also with men, and the masculinities is very important issue in terms of environmental issues, who owns land, who has the power and the decision over natural resources, for example. Regarding to data, we know that limited and fragmented data exists in relation to gender and environment. There is a lack of baselines, jeopardize accountability, inability to measure impact. I have said that before. Beijing, CEDAW, and the SDGs provide a strong mandate on gender, and all of them have mandate on environment. Why we still having this limited and fragmented data after 25 years? We need to train on how to link data and actions. And for that, we also need to train our partners, our organizations, governments, and civil society on how document case studies related to environmental issues, and to train how to connect gender differentiated data and environmental actions, and also how to measure impacts. The result that we are not measuring impacts on the environmental field is probably because we don't know how to measure. And we need to learn, and we need to teach, and we need to build capacity on measuring impacts as well. We need to work in other areas, for example, gender-based violence and environment. We just finished a document on this issue, and we found that it is not easy to make the link on gender-based violence and environment. We received more than 300 case studies, and there is a lack of knowledge on how to address this violence, gender-based violence in the environmental field. This is urgent, because we found that there are many ways of forms and types of gender-based violence in the environmental context. We also have seen that environmental human rights defenders is an emerging and urgent issue that we need to know how to address. It's growing, the violence against environmental human rights defenders, and we also need to train in another emerging issue, that is environmental and climate change migrants and displaced people. These new, I would say new, they're not new at all, issues, we have not developed special trainings and special methodologies for training. So, some ideas for the way forward. This is based on Lorena Aguilar. For farming gender in environmental issues, we need to anchor the global agreements. Do we have global agreements related to environmental issues? But we need to anchor them within national contexts so as to encourage a gender responsive approach. We need to recognize equality both as a driver for transformational change and as a catalyst to increase the effectiveness and efficiency of environment initiatives. It is important to recognize both drivers because, we also need to work on capacity and policy in terms of develop and implement the know-how at the national and local level for both. Again, for the environment sector and the gender and women's sector. We have found that we need to work together. We cannot just leave this issue to the environment sector. We need to enhance the women and gender sector and to reinforce their knowledge and their abilities to address environmental issues. And something that is very important, environmental issues include urban responses. We need to include the urban problems, the urban environmental problems. Traditionally, environmental issues have been seen as a rural problem, and that is not the case anymore. 80% of the population is living in urban spaces. So, and they have different environmental problems. So we need to include those environmental, urban environmental responses in our training as well. We need to develop gender responsive policies in climate change, biodiversity, and other related sectors like energy, for example. Forests, we have more on forests and water, and finance. This last one, finance, is very important. And you will see that for the first time, all the major financing mechanisms related to gender and environment have gender mandates. They have gender action plans, all of them. So we need to create spaces and skills for how women and women's organizations at the national and subnational levels can participate and access to these financial mechanisms. We made a very short, there is a short survey where there are millions and millions of dollars that had been put for climate change. Local organizations of women in Latin America have no idea, and they are millions of dollars. So we need to give them training and tools to access to these mechanisms of finance and of these mechanisms. We need for that to develop guidelines. We need case studies, knowledge generation, and capacity building within the secretariats of the major conventions, as well as the national level. We need clear accountability, again, and monitoring frameworks and mechanisms to monitor and report on implementation. That is very important. We need to see that the national reports, for example, for CEDAW, have not enough mention to the gender-based violence related to the environment, or the Beijing reports or other international reports that governments are obligated to do. They are not reporting environmental and gender issues. So that's my presentation, and I'll be happy to answer your questions. Thank you. Gracias.
Thank you so much, Itza. Muchas gracias for your presentation. That was completely excellent, just like Hamleta's and Jessamyn's and Rania's interventions. So Rania's had to leave us, but she'll also be able to answer any of your questions if you send them to the training center, and then we can pass them on to her. And so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to change the screens, because we're going to go on to the questions from our audience members that they've sent in today. And I'm just going to unmute Hamleta, Itza, and Jessamyn, all of whom you should be able to hear. And I am going to switch screens so that you can see the questions. Just give me 1 second. I'm very sorry for the time lag. Okay, so you should be able to see on your screens now some of the questions that we've had from our audience members. So the first question, I think, is directed towards Jessamine, but also towards Itza, because both of you are speaking about data. So I wonder if, Jessamine, you want to start by answering that question, maybe, which I'll just read out, which is, how do you ensure that your data is realistic? And Rosa says that in her experience, information that a company or a government gives is not always transparent. So I wonder, Jessamine, if you want to maybe take that question.
Yeah, thank you, Ruya, and thank you, Rosa, for asking that question. In terms of ensuring that data is realistic, official statistics on gender equality, that is those mainly produced by NSOs and other actors within the national statistical system, they are mainly guided by the UN Fundamental Principles of Official Statistics, where they present information according to scientific standards on the sources, methods, and procedures. They decide according to strictly professional considerations and are guided by internationally agreed guidelines and good practices shared by statistical communities. But of course, this is not to say that we cannot do better in terms of um, publishing the statistics. More often than not, statisticians are faced with challenges in making these numbers talk to make it feel as reality to their target audience. So the question is how we can do better in terms of how we can borrow the strength from various sources of data, both say quantitative and qualitative sources of data, how official sources of data and unconventional sources of data can be used to complement each other. And I think this is what I mentioned, particularly in the last part of my presentation, where there is need to create more and better gender data stories. And this is where much work is needed in terms of communicating these numbers to give them a human face for better uptake and appreciation. Thank you again, Rosa.
Thank you very much, Jessamine. Itza, do you want to reply also to that question, or is there any other on the screen that you'd like to field?
You said Itza?
Yes.
Yes. I think that for the environmental data and statistics, yes, we need to improve. Now that COP is happening in Spain, we have seen that data is really, really important. And the link between gender and climate change data, I think we need to develop, as I have said, new methodologies and to be creative, to really reflect what is happening, and not just to say we have differentiated impacts, that we know that because of the existing inequality. But what else do we need to capture with data and national statistics? We need to have a discussion on that.
Yeah. Ruya, if I may.
Yes, please, of course.
Yeah. Just to support the point from Itza on gender and environment statistics, I think I have mentioned several times, particularly for Asia and the Pacific, this is an expressed demand and expressed priority among member states. Just last November, if I'm not mistaken, we had a consultation not only with NSOs, but particularly with research communities, with academe, with private sector, in terms of how can we better develop gender and environment statistics. And they have they have an expressed need to form an institutionalized experts group on gender and environment statistics, particularly for Asia and the Pacific region. And this is to ensure that they are able to at least identify a core set of minimum indicators on this area on gender and environment statistics that goes beyond SDG identified SDG indicators, but also that addresses, the diverse gender and environment statistics needs within Asia and the Pacific. For example, the express need in Pacific countries versus the express need from Nepal and Indonesia would be varying, and that's when they would like to have a clear framework on what they want to monitor. So yes, I think we're very supportive of that. I mean, need that has been expressed by ITSA.
Thank you very much, Jessamine. That's a very important point. And I think also the last question on the screen that you see is also for ITSA, but maybe to bring Hamleta in a little bit, if you want to also maybe take the second and third questions, which are specifically about violence against women, which it's also mentioned. And I wonder if you want to answer the first question about, is it easy to bring male and female teachers together in the training? And do you feel that men flare away when they hear about gender equality? Because Hamleta, you touched on that in your presentation. So I wonder if you want to take those questions.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Ruya, and I'm like really happy to answer these questions. So you're absolutely right that it is difficult to bring the male and female teachers together for these trainings, because whenever we talk, so I am talking about the teachers coming from the public schools, and we need specific permissions from the government to engage with these teachers and then the students in the school. So the first and the foremost thing is that until we do not get the government's permission, we are not able to get these teachers together. So once the government has issued orders that you have to go for these trainings, that we want to implement such a program on gender equality and primary prevention of gender-based violence in schools, the teachers definitely do come forward as they are nominated by the government from their schools. However, the problem is that whenever it comes to the issue of gender, the first impression that the schools get is, oh, you have to send a female teacher. So now, we have started to implement the gender equity movement in schools program within the masculinities framework in the western part of India, in Rajasthan, where it is called Gems for Boys, where we are focusing the program first to work with adolescent boys in the schools. So here, interestingly, as the program is called Gems for Boys, the government instantly had this idea that, okay, more male teachers should go in. And that is what we saw, that out of the 500 teachers who turned up for trainings, at least, almost there were like 60% of them were male teachers. So this is the kind of impression that goes out. And then that's the very first barrier, that how do you bring the male and female teachers together? And once they have arrived for these trainings, the best thing is that if you start the issues, again, as I said, with the basic idea of acknowledging that human rights are there for each one of us, and in any case they cannot be suspended, and we all have experienced violation of rights in our lives. So if we start the conversations from that level, there is a bonding that develops initially, to at least have that room space in the room, that if we start talking about the more serious issues, when we start building on to issues such as sexual violence, or giving them more I would say harsh statements such as women who wear short clothes invite men for rape. So when the discussions at that level come up, by that time we have already built that confidence amongst the male and the female teachers, that we are not pitching you against each other. It's about both need to discuss about the issues together. So definitely there's a lot of resistance from the male teachers, and it is not that the resistance is only from male teachers, there is also from female teachers, because we also see the same kind of narratives about women should not go out in the night or should not wear short clothes, so otherwise they'll face sexual violence. The same views are also held by women. So it is a challenge, but starting with the idea of human rights really works well. However, it doesn't mean that it will change all of them instantly, but at least the conversations start sitting together. There is another question on whether GEMS is being introduced in with South African government. So as of now, I'm not aware of it, but the ICRW office in Uganda is trying to have an initiative to start this in Uganda. And also, I'll just talk specifically on also briefly the fourth question, that how do we train the law enforcement agencies on violence against women and girls. So the law enforcement agencies are, it's very clear for them that they are part of the governance. And when it comes to governance, so far the narrative has never been on prevention. So it is from when we start talking to them, we have to start from the point of view of power. So what kind of power they hold, and in that power, how do they make use of that power to in governance? So does governance includes prevention as well? So I think the same kind of questions need to be raised with the law enforcement agencies, the same kind of statements we use with them as well, whether, you know, this is violence, the kind of case study I talked about. But in that, we try to bring their role, of course, the self reflection in their own lives does come first, but then the role of the law enforcement agencies in terms of the power they have for governance and how they can flip it around to not just response but prevention.
Wonderful. Thank you. I think your point about governance and about the acceptability that, you know, governments have towards training and how they view it ties in really nicely to the fifth question on the screen, which I wonder, Itza, if you could maybe speak a little about. So the question is from Jamila, and it says, how do we convince governments to take training on gender equality and the environment seriously? As we see from the climate strike and responses to gender equality, governments do not seem willing to act or to invest in training. So I wonder if you and then maybe Jasmine want to answer that question as well.
Okay, thank you. Well, the first point is that it's a mandate. It's not a question of convince governments. Those governments that are part of the convention, for example, on climate change, on biodiversity, on the other, well, many conventions that are mandatory, that have gender action plans, they have to do it because the gender action plans are mandating them to do it. And there is also a general recommendation from the Committee of CEDAW that I recommend very much to revise, is general recommendation number 37, that is related to gender and climate change and disasters related to climate variability. And it's also a mandate for those countries that are part, that have signed the CEDAW and the other conventions. So what we need to do as civil society, for example, is to demand them to do it. To, how do you say in English, exigir? I don't know how to say, to demand, to
demand, to insist, yes.
To insist, because it's a mandate. It's not if they want or they don't. That's my point.
I think that's a very important point. And because we're running a bit out of time, I've gone on to the next set of questions, and which you can see on your screens now. I don't know if any of you three are interested in asking and in answering them, but I think this ties in nicely to the 8th question and the 9th question, which is, as Itza says, you know, like this is a mandate and it has to be done. So I wonder, Jessamine, if you want to jump in and speak about, you know, UN Women's approach maybe to teaching the public sector on collecting and analyzing gender data, maybe perhaps through training, and so that we can use and compare it. And that's a question from Mariana.
Thank you, Ruya, and thank you, Mariana, for the question. So in terms of what does UN Women does in terms of teaching the public sector, it's really ensuring that we strengthen their capacity. So basically, we do not only, I mean, for gender, for example, for gender and environment statistics, it's very difficult to to collect, but nonetheless, these challenges should be surmountable. So I think what we do in UN Women is to ensure that it's not only the production that we are highlighting in terms of teaching, but also ensuring an enabling mechanism. So basically, just having that forum on users producers dialogues, it's also a training itself. It's also a capacity development, because not only do users understand gender statistics, but statisticians, data producers will also be capacitated in the process by learning better on what gender data statistics should be produced or what they should be prioritized. So basically, it's what I'm saying is that in terms of teaching or enabling the public sector, it's providing that kind of environment, that users producers dialogue, that institutional mechanism. We support the establishment of interagency coordination mechanisms or technical working groups within countries, so that this highly decentralized system for gender statistics, where all ministries have their own set of gender statistics, will actually be coordinated, would be using similar standards, and would be talking with each other that these statistics are present, these statistics are not, or which statistics should actually be prioritized. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jessamine. And it's our Henlata, would you like to jump in on any of the other questions? Or do you have any final comments maybe to wrap up?
So I think the question number 6, quickly I can just say that yes, in the context of India, where we use Hindi largely, like predominantly to communicate, so we do have a local appropriate term for the issue for sexuality. However, on gender, now when we translate it to the local language vernacular, so the meaning changes quite a lot, and the nuance also changes. So the best way forward that we've thought is to incorporate or help people to learn this word. And because anyways in the local language also a lot of English words are being used so frequently, so this is yet another word which is used as is, and gender is used in the schools as well as by teachers, and also at the national level in the school curriculum also the term is used in English. And I think the final comment from my side would be that whenever we are talking about training, as I think one of our colleagues, and even Jasmine have said, that it is very important to measure the pathway, like where are we moving and what is the change at what level. And we have found that a mix of qualitative and quantitative both approaches has proven really well. And when we want to measure about the changes in the attitudes and behaviors of children on the issue of gender-based violence, one of the best ways forward which worked for us in a lot of contexts in India, which also the government has also accepted that yes, this is a good way of collecting the data, and they agree with whatever data is coming out from that, is actually self-administered interviews through the CAPI, and also audio recorded questions where the children can hear themselves and answer. So it gives a high amount of reliability also to the government that okay, these are the voices of children which are being captured directly, and that is a quantitative indicators. And for the qualitative also, in-depth interviews with children over a span of time helped in getting good measures on the pathways of change, and also narratives around their attitude change around gender roles, and around rejecting gender-based violence, or improved bystander intervention. So yeah, that's it from my side.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Hamlata. It's our Jasmine. Do you have any final comments to make or anything to say about these questions? Or are you happy to wrap up?
No, I have no additional comments, and I need to go.
Okay, thank you.
Just to thank everyone who have participated, and especially those who have raised the questions. I mean, it's been a great pleasure to speak to everyone.
Thank you so much, Jessamine. It's been a pleasure. Thank you so much. Also, I echo this to all our audience members and to all three of you and to Rania as well for joining us today. It's been a wonderful experience, and I think we've all learned a lot. And so I want to say just on behalf of the UN Women Training Center that we'd like to thank you all, Hamleta, Itza, Jessamine, and Rania as well for your excellent presentations, and to all our audience members who listened live for their questions especially. And as I've mentioned, that we're going to continue the discussions in the UN Women Training Center's Community of Practice Forum, which if you look on your screens, you can access by going to our web portal. And you log in by going through My Courses. And if you aren't a COP member, then please, I would encourage all of you to join. It's completely free and it's very simple, and it's a very great place to really discuss all these questions that interest us so much about training for gender equality and the Beijing Platform for Action. And I'd also encourage all of you to join the Generation Equality campaign, which UN Women has launched to, really get Beijing+25 out there in the world to really galvanize change for gender equality. And so we have, as I mentioned, this webinar has been recorded and we'll upload it to our YouTube channel. And all of you will receive a follow-up email, and we'll be preparing a final report, which should be with you either in late December, which may be a bit optimistic, but definitely by the beginning of the new year. So thank you again once more to all our panelists, Hamleta, Itza, Jessamine, and Rania as well for participating today. And thank you for everyone who listened live. We wish you all a wonderful day, and we hope to see you in the virtual dialogue discussion forum. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Have a good day, everyone.
Thank you.
Yeah, have a good day. Bye.